Good night, everybody. Welcome to the 13th and best episode of the Hashcast. And I have two special guests with me tonight, and we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff. This is going to be a show where I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to let my guests do all the talking because they are, again, way more awesome than I am, but that's what you've gotten used to in this show. So first, I have here my friend Tanya DePass. How are you, Tanya?
Good. Try not to melt in this heat. Oh my God. I know it's hot for you too.
Yeah, it's a scorcher. So Tanya, you are the founder and director of I Need Diverse Games. But I hear you have like 18 other careers as well. So maybe we'll get into that as well. And on the other side of the line, I have my friend Osama Dorias.
Hello, how you doing?
Good, how are you? Game
I'm
designer
really happy to be here.
in Montreal. An extraordinary hugger, I must say.
World class. I'll take that compliment. Yeah.
So
you are.
Yeah,
I think
he is. I don't think we've hugged yet, Tanya, but maybe we'll get the opportunity. I've seen you in action, but you were behind this big desk at PAX, and I was just in the audience. So
oh no,
yeah, it's all true.
Oh, just come say hi. Don't bite.
No, I know you didn't. I know you didn't. You were just busy. So I already messed up my intro for the video part because I was on Osama's face while I was talking, but that's okay. It's a new show, so I'm still allowed. So Tanya, I'm gonna start with you because I gave you the quick introduction, but I know there's much more to tell about you. So I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes so you can brag about yourself and how awesome you are.
Oh my God. So I don't know about the how awesome I am part, but we can get into that later. So what I do is I run I Need Diverse Games, which is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3. So for Canadian listeners, we're a nonprofit. We basically do charity work in the gaming industry. I am a partner Twitch broadcaster, and I'm also part of the Spawnomy podcast. It is every Thursday at 7:30 Pacific on Twitch. I am now part of the Rivals of Waterdeep, which is a D&D show on the D&D Twitch channel every Sunday, 12 p.m. Central. I write, I do journalism, I run my mouth on the internet a lot about diversity and inclusion, and I often yell at people when I'm having a crappy day, but I try not to do that too often. And I write a lot of fanfic. I'm a big Dragon Age nerd, and if you talk to me for more than 5 minutes, you'll probably hear me talk about Dragon Age and Mass Effect.
We'll probably get there. We'll probably sneak it in at some point. And Osama, how about yourself? Like I already mentioned, like game designer, but I know you also have a pretty long track record because when we first met, you were not a game designer at Warner Brothers. You had like 18 other jobs as well.
That's right. Well, I'm a senior game designer at Warner Brothers. I've been there for about a year now, and I'm working on a really exciting game that I can say very little about, so I'll say it. It's a AAA console open world game in a major DC franchise, and it's as cool as it sounds.
Oh.
On top of that, I'm also the coordinator of the video game programs at Dawson College. I authored the independent game design program about 5 years ago, where we just finished interviewing for our 5th cohort. It's about to start in August. So we had 3 graduating classes, and some of the teams that graduated are doing really well, and we're really proud of them. And on top of that, I also am the co-founder of the Montreal Independent Games Festival, which is running. We didn't announce the date for this year yet, but we already had 3 years, and we're going on our 4th year. And I'm very proud of that as well.
Okay.
What else? I think I'll stop there because there's a few other things as well. Like I'm on the Montreal International Game Summit's selection committee, and I've been an Indicate juror for years and stuff like that. But I think they overlap a little bit.
Yeah, well, and I'm the Hashtagonist, and I have a Twitter account and a show on the internet, and that's about it. So, as always, I am heavily outclassed by my guests, but that's what the show's for, and that's what the show's all about. So,
you're far too kind. I'm just honored to be on the same show as Tanya. I just have to say that.
Well, you should say that because we were talking before we hit record, and when I try to combine my guests, I think, okay, this person would gel well with this person, so I invited you both, and then I didn't realize that you already knew each other. So how did that happen?
Do you want to go, Tanya, or do you want me?
Well, I had been following Osama for a while online, and I realized, oh, cool, we're both going to be at GDC. And I think you came to the roundtable part 1 that I did with Rebecca, because Rebecca Cohen-Palacios and I have been doing a roundtable for a couple of years.
Oh, I love Rebecca.
We got a chance to... Yes, Rebecca's my favorite human. and we got a chance to meet briefly, but I think we both had to kind of run off. And then I came to your talk, and you totally made me cry, Osama. It was a great talk.
Thank you very much. I cried too. We cried together.
You did. Well, that's what made me start crying. I'm just like, damn it.
Yeah. That was a great talk. I saw it online, so I got to cry like in delay. But yeah, that was great, and that's kind of why I invited you both, because that's really what I wanted to talk about. Like diversity in
From
games.
my point of view, like I actually same thing. I followed Tanya. I was a big fan of hers for a very long time, and I had applied for one of her scholarships to go to GDC and got accepted, but had to turn it down because my talk got accepted as well, so I didn't need it anymore. And that was my first interaction with her, and it was very pleasant. She was so awesome and kind, and she was like, yeah, don't worry about it, everything is all cool. And I had a roundtable to give at GDC, and it was my first roundtable ever. And so I went to see the pros do it, so I could learn from her. That's why that happened. And I learned a lot, and my roundtable was really well received. So thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
And it's so funny because when we were hanging out with Osama in Montreal when it was like 18 centimeters snow, you were talking about this, that your talk got accepted as well, but I had no idea that was going through Tanya. So all the pieces are falling into place, which is pretty cool. It is a small world after all. But yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about diversity in games because it comes up often. And for me, like, I am just a giant straight dude, white, and I get to play with myself all the time, but not everybody has that pleasure, I guess, or no, not everybody is used to that. So for me, like, it never stands out. Like, when I play my game, I just play my game. There's nothing extra for me there because I'm being like beaten to death with myself in games. And when I do play with a character that is diverse, it's just, to me, it's just a cool character, but for other people, that's such a bigger deal, and I cannot understand. I don't think I can properly understand how important it is. So that's why I invite the experts to talk about that. So Tanya, I'm gonna start with you because you literally run an organization that's called I Need Diverse Games. So how did you start off with that? Like, I can guess the why, but I want to hear it from you.
So I was legit mad about video games at 6 a.m. about 4 years ago at this point. It was around when Ubisoft was talking about it was hard to animate women, and that was coming around again. And like E3 had happened, and it was just yet again another group of games where it's like scruffy white dude protagonist. Like, we didn't see any female leads, we didn't see any characters of color that were leads, really. And I was mad about it, and so I was tweeting about why I'm tired of being left out, why I don't get to be a protagonist. And I think the very first tweet was because I'm sick of seeing this scruffy white dude as the lead, and the hashtag I Need Diverse Games. And I was just throwing out these tweets. I was getting ready for work, and I was annoyed. And then one of my friends, Mickey Kendall, Carnithia Online, retweeted me, and she has a much bigger Twitter presence. And so it started trending, and that was around 6 a.m. I got to work, and she called me at work, which she never does. She's like, you need some bots, because this is unfortunately also when the dark times were happening in gaming that I don't want to name those people.
The dark times.
Yes, the Death Eaters were trying to rise, as I like to call it. And they latched onto it and did their usual thing, but it was right time, right place, and people didn't want to give up the conversation. It got its own Twitter account because it started off my personal Twitter. And community grew out of it, and we kept going. I started getting podcast interviews, actual interviews. And it was like, hey, this conversation keeps going. What is it we can do? And 2 years later, we became a 501c3 because I started going to conventions, started going to PAX. The first year that the hashtag existed, Geek Girl Con did an impromptu panel about it. And then I submitted a panel to Geek Girl Con. They didn't take it. So that's a thing. But I've had a chance to talk about it and be part of the Diversity Lounge at PAX. And from there, it's just become an ongoing conversation. People do want to do the work. And it's been peeling away a lot of layers of there are people who are dedicated to this and want to do better, but maybe they don't have the senior position to do so. Maybe they don't have the authority to make the final decision. So while what we see on stage at E3 and at GDC and other places is overwhelmingly white and male, that's not always the case in studio that the general public doesn't get to see.
Okay. And Osama, like you have a fantastic talk on Muslim representation in video games. Can you, for those who have not heard this yet, and they really should, but can you give us the... well, if it's 14 minutes long, you can do the whole thing if you want. I'm like, I don't care.
Thank you. It's about, what was it, 38 minutes long? The thing is about that talk, the truth is everyone who shows up, they say that any point I make can be made about any marginalized group, and that's true, and that's the whole point. I mean, the details are different, of course, and that's why if people want to represent any kind of marginalized group, they should get consultants because they're going to get the details wrong. If they have good intentions, they're going to get all the big points right. But the devil's in the details, as they say. But otherwise, it's common sense. It really is. Like it's common sense for anybody who just stops for a second and thinks about what it means to have a representation of yourself. The only problem is, and that's what we're trying to resolve, is that people who have had representation all this time, they've never had to think about it, as you stated before. So it's not their fault, but they haven't had to think about it, so they don't see the importance. I grew up in Canada, which is North America. We're under the shadow of the States, so in a lot of ways we have the same culture as Americans. And I grew up here as a Muslim Arab youth with zero representation in media, or very close to zero. I mean, unless you count Aladdin and a few other things like that. And that's not really even very good representation, but whatever. It was something, and I latched onto that. So I grew up with an identity crisis, as a lot of people in my position do, where I didn't know who I was supposed to be. And every time I was depicted on screen, between brackets, I was a villain, or I was an ignorant person, or I was poor, or a whole bunch of other things that I wasn't, and it was very confusing. I remember, without like taking over your show with my story.
No, go.
That's what fueled me. I mean, I was a person who absolutely loved entertainment. That's why I read comic books. I play video games. That's why I'm in the industry as a creator right now, because I'm very passionate about these things. And when I started working in the industry initially, Montreal is in Quebec, which is a French-Canadian province, and almost every person I worked with was French-Canadian, and they were very, very pleasant, very nice people, but they were completely oblivious to my struggles, and they spent a big amount of time, and I'm generalizing here, of course, there were many exceptions. I had a lot of people who had introspection and didn't fall into this trap, but many people spent a lot of time trying to talk me out of being Muslim, or trying to help me be more, I guess, white is a way to say it. And they were very well-meaning, so I couldn't even be hostile towards them. And it was this conflict where it took a while before I even got the vocabulary with which I could explain myself. I mean, to tell them why what they were saying is offensive. They didn't even see that. But I have good intentions, and good intentions means I'm good, and therefore you can't be upset that I'm making these statements or making these jokes or whatnot. So, I mean, this was 11 years ago now when I started in the industry, and things have changed. Things have gotten much better. Recently, I did a panel at CGX called Celebrating Diversity, and the reason we still have a long way to go. We're just past the first marker, but we at least got past the first marker, and it only took us a decade to do it. So I'm hopeful for the future. That's what my talk was about. It was about, okay, now that there are people who are hungry for this, who actually understand that it's an issue and who want to make these changes, which was not the reality 10 years ago. Now I can give you a how-to guide, this little shortcut to be able to not make the big mistakes. That's it. Yeah. So that's what my talk is in the gist of it.
But what I want to know is, how did you go from seeing this and feeling that something had to change to becoming such a voice? You went to have that talk. Did you get to support? Where did that come from? And how do you build that? Because someone might be listening saying, "Hey, I should do this as well." How do you get to the point where you guys are that you get to make a difference? If that's not a way too broad question, Tanya.
I think it's just perseverance, and and Osama might laugh at this, but whenever I get reached out to, I'm always like, why are you why me? I guess just because I'm ornery, and when I see things, I'm not saying anything super revolutionary. I'm not saying anything that anyone else with common sense shouldn't see. But because we're the people that are actually going out and saying it often and being very loud about it, I think that's where the attention comes from. You know, if we were out there screaming and yelling at devs, if we were, you know, like always putting people on the defensive, like on public or on social media, you know, and this is going to sound terrible, like tone policing, but you're not going to affect change. You're not going to get someone listening to you if you're always screaming, yelling, talking about how they're terrible and things like that. An example I have is I had a chance to go talk at Twitch, which, you know, they're not game developers, but they're a big part of the industry. And it was about the bad culture on Twitch. You know, because, so, you know, it's not safe for people of color, people who want to be out who are queer. And I had someone approach me that really wanted me to basically go in there guns blazing, not literally, please no one think I'm being literal, I'm actually terrified of guns, and kind of give them what for. And it's like, one, I'm being invited, but it's a professional discussion. That's where I think the line comes in at, is that people understand that there are discussions to be had as professionals, as colleagues, or even as fans, versus these screaming all caps, flailing at people do on social media. And that's not putting people down, but to affect change, there's a certain manner of discourse you have to have.
Okay. How about you, Osama? How did you put yourself in the spotlight like this?
Well, first of all, it's debatable if I'm even in the spotlight, but thank you.
You are.
Yeah, you are.
That's very, very kind of you to say. Regardless, I actually was speaking about this topic from day one. The only difference is people speak to their circle of influence, and over time, a circle of influence will grow. That's all it is. When I first started working in the industry, I worked at a company that did make games that misrepresented Muslims and minorities in general, to be honest. The people who I worked with were very good people who were not sensitive to these problems. That's a proper way to say it, right? They didn't have any bad intentions, but we worked for other people who were far away, and they were even more tone deaf. You know, that was a reality I was in, where I had to fight battles constantly. Yeah. So I had to pick my battles, because otherwise I'm branded as the person who's just constantly complaining about everything. So the biggest fight that I won early on was that I was working on a game that was kind of similar to Call of Duty. And in it, there was a fight that was supposed to take place in a mosque where American soldiers are stationed there and terrorists are attacking. Yeah. Already, the game itself, the story was problematic, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to change that. I knew, like, I was a lowly junior designer. There's no way I was going to affect that, right? But what I'm going to do is pick this one thing and make sure that it doesn't ship. Because that was going to be a PR nightmare too, and they didn't even see it. And to be honest, it might not even have been, because we're not sensitive to that at that time. But I saw it that way, and I was successful. At the end, the mosque got turned into a palace with a very slight reskin and some re-recorded voiceovers, and that was enough. Every game I would narrow down to 2 or 3 things, and not all of them were about Muslim causes. There were others that I could talk about, but I'd rather keep it positive. Some of them are infuriating when I think about them right now. Okay, I'll just say one, just to give you an idea. So at one point, and I apologize in advance, Tanya, this one's going to be a little bit rough. But at one point where I was working on an open world game, and we were very few minorities on that team, and you know, everyone's working on their thing. You get a little bit of tunnel vision when you're working on a project. But at some point, a woman on our team said, "Hey, we don't have any black women in this game. It's an open world game that takes place in a big city, and we don't have any black women. We have black men. We don't have black women. How is this? Like, how did we get here?" And I freaked out, because I didn't notice. I was doing my design docs and nobody noticed. And everyone was like, "What's the big deal?" It's not a big deal, except for me, her, and one other person, and 2 people of color and 1 woman, right? So that's why you need diversity on your teams. Be more sensitive to these things. So we championed this. and it was very late in production. And normally, any change at this caliber would have been impossible. We were like we were fixing bugs. We weren't adding content, but we managed to add it last minute. Except it wasn't. We weren't the art team. So someone on the art team thought, "Oh, okay, I'll fix two problems. We also don't have a lot of prostitute models, so we'll just make black prostitute women."
Oh God!
And so 100% of the women that were in our city that were black were prostitutes.
Oh wow!
And it shipped that way. Yeah, and we were like, "What? That we just made it worse." These are the kind of fights we're fighting. This is like 11 years ago.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing I mean. So a lot of the other things that I mentioned in my talk, like pick proper voice actors or very like low level things. No, we were fighting the WTF that will never pass now. We had to do an update on that game and fix it retroactively, obviously, of course, because people did notice. People were starting to figure things out at that point. So we've come a really long way. We're fighting very different fights now. And that is a reason to celebrate, even if we're really far from the goalpost. I don't know if you agree, Tanya, but I mean, it's night and day, right? We're not where we used to be 10 years ago.
Oh, no. I mean, 10 years ago, we could have never gotten where we are now.
No.
100%.
Yeah, I also just want to point out for the people who are just listening, like when Osama was talking about the last part, Tanya had like a giant face palm that lasted for like 2.5 minutes. It's well worth going on to the YouTube version just to see that.
Yeah, because I was just like, okay, that happened.
That happened. Do you recognize what game that is, Tanya? Without throwing
I'm
Osama
trying
under the bus
to
there.
think.
No, please don't look up. Don't look it up.
I'll look it up later. I mean,
I'll tell you later off the air.
Okay.
Fair enough. But do you agree, Tanya, that we've come a long way?
I think so, because even almost 5 years ago when I Need Diverse Games started, 10 years ago, a hashtag would have come and gone. Nobody would have cared. People would have still went, "Oh, it's gaming. That's how it is," and get a thicker skin and like get off the internet noob. I mean, they still do it, but it's not as prevalent. There are people that are like, "No, this is important," and there are people that are like, it'd be nice to turn on a game and not always see the same, like Duke Nukem type character that's always saving the world. So there are other people that are not people of color, that are not queer, that are going, it'd be nice to have something different, or noticing and speaking up, because, and I'm sure you get this too, Osama, is when you're the only one advocating or one of a few people advocating and you get worn out. There's a fatigue in there, because at some point you just go, I'm pushing, I'm doing this work. When is there going to be that tangible aha moment when someone finally gets it? Or when you become the diversity person and everyone wants to run to you with every little thing of, "Oh my God, you see this game? There's like no brown people," or "There's only like one black chick in there and she's dark skinned and nobody likes her. Aren't you mad?" And I'm like, yes, I'm mad, but I also have bills to pay. And I've got other things to do than be mad on the internet 24/7 for your entertainment.
So,
absolutely.
So, Osama, you can probably shed some light on this. How much of this has to do with just the dev cycle, where you guys been bringing this up for years and years and years, and maybe now we are starting to see the first results? Because when I looked at E3, it looked different than I was used to be honest. Like, it's not all there yet, but do you think this is the start of a brand new cycle?
I really hope so. The problem with cycles is sometimes it wraps around and goes back down. Yeah. So I really hope that it's some kind of a linear arc that's going to go all the way up and it's just going to bring about positive change forever. Mm-hmm. So let's hope that that's what this is. But that's what it seems like. And to be honest, that's what I'm experiencing. I didn't see any regression in the last 10 years. We've only been improving. But yeah, a lot of this has to do with people, especially on bigger projects. And most of these problems come from bigger projects. Everyone's doing their tasks. Everyone is assigned little pieces of the game, and everyone's hunkered down working on it. Very few people have as a job to look at the big picture of the game and evaluate it as is. And that's what happened with that game that I mentioned before. Nobody intentionally left out black women, but the major problem is we had no black women on the dev team, so that they would have been instantly sensitive to that, and that's a problem that we have to fix right away, and not getting better as fast as it should, if we're perfectly honest. But that's what would have fixed that specifically. But nobody had any bad intentions, and nobody fought it for any other reason other than production.
Yeah.
Like everyone it's a business first and foremost. So what I started doing is I made a business case for everything, because you have to speak to people in their language, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a big success with that. So and it's kind of, you lose a little bit of yourself when you do that, because you hate that you have to speak this language, but there's no point. What is it that you want at the end? Do you want to be right, or do you want to affect change?
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to, compromise. So you bring about the business case and you say, listen, there could be backlash, or listen, we could target more people, or listen, these are all the things, all the positive things that could come about from making this one change, and these are the negative things that could come about from not having them. And people are very receptive. Nobody's there standing and saying, I don't want diversity. I mean, from the devs, I've never met a person who says, I just want white people, like white male, like straight people in my game. I've never met a person who said that, period.
Except for
I don't know if that's your
Deliverance.
experience.
What?
Yeah. Okay. I've never met anyone who worked on that game. So, yeah. But from my experience in the industry, I've never met a single person who's resisted diversity for any other reason than production reasons. And those reasons are bad reasons, and that's why I took the what I mean to say is those reasons are actually going to cost you in the end. So I took that stance instead.
Yeah. How about you, Tanya? When you, I think I saw you tweet about E3, but what was the ratio for you, like between like, hey, that's nice to see, and oh my god, here we go again?
It was interesting because there was a lot of talk about how E3 was so much more diverse, because Last of Us 2 got premiered. Gears of War 5 is going to have a female protagonist. But it was still, I think I saw more animals and cutesy things and non-human creatures than people of color and women leading games. Yeah. Everyone's like, oh my god, Beyond Good and Evil, or Beyond Good and Evil 2, and I'm just like, you still have a rhino with dreadlocks.
Yeah.
So, not really buying it. Just because you got a black chick and her hair looks good, that doesn't excuse the anthropomorphic animals that look very much like stereotypes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's a start, but like I am just not qualified to really talk about that, because what I just know is like, hey, there's a lot of playable women in this E3, a lot of white women too. So I'm not sure if we're getting there from a diversity perspective, but like that's what I always have trouble with, how to relate to that, because it's not that people like me don't want to see it, but I guess they just do not pick it up. And the only thing, might be the dumbest thing I've ever said, that I can maybe compare it to is like, I'm Dutch. So when I watch a movie or there's a game and there's like something Dutch in there, like there's a one spoken line like in the Born Identity where he speaks Dutch, and like, oh, that's cool, that's my language. And then I have that little perk up. Would that be even remotely comparable? That's just how cool it feels to see yourself or something from your culture represented in what you care about?
It can be, but the problem is that, even with hearing the Dutch in this movie, it's still, you're going to get representation because you're a white dude. But like for me and Osama, I don't get to really see black women in games unless they're either cannon fodder or they're a stereotype. Like, I'm a big Dragon Age nerd. Got really excited when we got Vivienne, this dark-skinned, black, beautiful, regal woman, and she's like on the side of the oppressors, and she's not voiced by a black woman, and she basically got her start by cuckolding a white dude.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, it's really apparent that no one black wrote this woman. And I say this as a big fan of the franchise, and the problem that a lot of it, and everyone I know talks about diversity, comes up with the same thing of, if there was more than one character that's gay, black, queer, what have you, that is not cis straight white dude, then they would not have to represent everything to everyone. Like, I'm trying to think, like when Mass Effect 3 finally got male romances, or male romances, and people were so excited, it was just like, why did it take 3 games just to be a thing?
Yeah.
Or why did it take 3 games of Dragon Age to finally get a black character, and then look what you did with her? So, on the one hand, I get excited, but then I always have that kind of suspicious / cautionary moment of, okay, you gave me a brown character, you gave me a queer character. What is this going to be like in the final game? You know, are they going to be a tool of the oppressors? Are they going to be very blatantly, someone thought, oh, diversity, let's stick a brown character in here.
Yeah.
Or let's stick a redheaded white woman in there. Look, we're diverse. And I'm just like, that's not how that actually works.
No, I'm just reaching to help me understand really what it must feel like.
No, I get it. And it's like, I'm sure that, you know, not being home and hearing your native language is awesome. But it's like a microcosmic version of what underrepresented people can get. Because unless you speak Dutch, or unless you go, hey, I'm actually Dutch, or I'm Canadian, or what have you, there's not going to be that, oh, poor you never get to see yourself. There's not enough Dutch people in movies.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So
and even then, it's
you're
like
missing
cool.
one side of it. Like, the other side that Tanya touched up on that you're missing completely is that Dutch people are not cannon fodder in games. You don't like when we play a game that has human bad guys. Generally, they fall into a few categories, right? They're either Nazis from the 40s, or like Germans, or they're Russians from the 80s, or they're Arabs from any time whatsoever, or they're black people from Africa from any time whatsoever, and without any kind of context whatsoever. So the Russians, it's because of communism and the Cold War, and the Germans, it's because of Nazism and the World War. But Arabs, it's because they're Arab. Black people, it's because they're black people. Point final. And then you don't have the good representation, or if it's there, it's just a token, a person who happens to be there just to say, hey, we're not saying all Arabs are bad. Look, there's one good one, and you're going to go killing 1,000 in the game. But look, there's one good one. So see, that's fine, right? We did our job, right? Did we check the box? Are you okay now? That's the kind of thing that that you don't have. Your thing is valid. It's just you're not being bombarded with the exact with a negative stereotype over and over throughout your entire life. You're just not as present, and that's actually, I would give my right arm to have had that problem, if I could be honest. Like, there are a lot of people who have identity crises, not because they don't see each other. That's already a huge problem. But because whenever they see themselves being represented in a game, it's a caricature of who that they don't recognize. It's not them at all, and they don't understand where their place is in society because of it. This is like, that's how big, that's the scale that we're talking about. It's astronomical.
Yeah, and like you said, like, I never had that. Like, the closest thing ever is the movie Goldmember, where they have a Dutch villain who's like super annoying and a caricature, and even that is clearly like a parody, and it's clearly stupid. And even I was like, we don't talk like that. And it's like one movie out of a billion, so I can see how that must be. If like, well, I can't see, like, I can try to understand how it must be, but it's constantly like that. But how do people like myself contribute to making this better if we have trouble even understanding or seeing it? Tanya, I'll start with you.
I would say listen when people talk about these things, because what I'll get a lot, and I'm sure you get it too, is Osama, is people pushing back and acting like it's just a game. It's, why are you so mad about it? Why do you even care? And I try to give examples kind of like what you gave, of imagine if you were X and you never got to see yourself, or if straight romances were always treated like something that was an anomaly, that it wasn't normal, that it was something that, has to be dealt with. When I don't get to see good bisexual representation, or I don't get to see like happy queer romances in things, is one, believing that it happens, and noticing the fact that, was I played D&D, and Jeremy Crawford was talking about one of the reasons that he has so much queerness in Blue Rose, and he would point out to like other devs that, you just assume that a couple in a game or a couple in a passage is written as a man and woman. Why can't you say a man and his husband, or this woman missed her wife, or, someone who's non-binary missed their partner? Like, reminding people that the default doesn't always have to be heteronormative and cis and straight and white. Or just asking them, what if you woke up tomorrow and you being straight was outlawed? Which we know isn't going to happen, but something that they're going to latch onto, but also speaking up and not letting marginalized people always carry the load, because it gets exhausting.
Anything to add to that, Osama?
She said it beautifully. The only thing I would say is if you're in a position to be a vocal ally, do so, because we do appreciate it. Just make sure your voice doesn't drown out the person who's speaking, for obvious reasons. But that's very, very appreciated. If you're a developer as well, try to take on some causes, even if you're not the marginalized person. Like, try to take the lead on some of them, because as Tanya mentioned before, we get fatigued, and it's very normal human thing to have happen. And also, if we are the only people who are speaking up, we start to be seen as the problem within the company. Like, I'm very lucky Warner Brothers has been incredible, and I'm very vocal about how supportive and amazing they've been. I've worked at other companies, without mentioning names, that haven't been, and the difference is stark. Where at WB, people come up to me and say, "Is this okay?" in a very friendly and open, and we will make changes if it's not type of way. Other people ask the same question with a sneer. So are you going to say something about this now? That kind of and that completely and it's such a different energy. It speaks volumes, you know what I mean? It'll decide whether I want to take on that battle or not. When someone comes with an open, when they're sincere and open about the question, I'm much more likely to take the time, and because it's a much smaller emotional load to be able to, in order to answer that. But when somebody approaches in a, oh crap, he's going to talk again, then yeah, I'm much less likely to talk again. I also don't want to be branded as the troublemaker, or potentially escalate into people not listening to me about things that are part of my job, because they don't take me seriously. I don't want to be the diversity guy. I'm not only the diversity guy. I give talks about that as well, but I also am an expert in my field, and I want to be acknowledged for that as well. And then, unfortunately, in some companies, one takes away from the other. Does that make sense? Do I need to clarify it? Because it sounded like I said I don't want to be the diversity guy. That's not true. I just don't want only be that, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Sense. There's more to me than just being an advocate, is what I meant to say.
Do you have peers in other large development companies that you can brainstorm with, or do you ever consult each other, or do you consult an organization I Need Diverse Games? Is that organized at all, or is it just people like yourselves who are willing to speak up like that? Is there anything going on behind the scenes that we might not know of, or things we should pay attention to?
Yes. Can I?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
So basically, I make a short list of awesome people, and whenever I'm unsure about something because it's on the fringes, or because I just don't know, because I've been problematic in the past as well. Everybody has. So there's learning that happens all the time, and people get better over time, right? But that getting better is you have to consult with other people, and you'll learn from them. There's a big learning that happens. So some people that we've even mentioned in the podcast so far, I trust them so much that if they have a problem that I'm not sure about, they become my go-to people. And we have networks offline on social media where we share emails with each other or share situations with each other. There's half support groups and half almost consultation groups, right? And they're very important to us. I'm not going to out people and say who's who, because you never know, people might see it the wrong way. But I still actively learn about other people, other marginalized people, and their struggles through these as well. And I often share the results on social media, but anonymously. So you can get a hint of what kind of conversations I'm having by what I'm talking about more recently, because once I learn something, I'm excited to share it. So that's my experience. Tanya?
For me, it's usually the conversations I'm having that are under NDA that I can't ever talk about until after the fact. I got to go to Ubisoft Montreal and give a talk about diversity. I got to go to ArenaNet and do a talk about diversity. And it's people that are invested in this and want to do better, but often they have very rudimentary ways of thinking about diversity, and that's not a slam. It's they've not had to think about it. They've not had to consider other points of view, or they think will add this one brown character, whatever, and then when they get feedback from the community, either during an alpha stage or even internally, then it's like, oh, we should bring someone in who knows what they're talking about. And this is one thing I want to caution about diversity consultants. And granted, it's what I do for a living. One person cannot be a one-size-fits-all diversity consultant. Yeah. If you are part of a big company and you can afford it, get people from multiple points of view, because someone who is raised in Chicago during a certain time of like the 80s or 90s, grew up on one side, is going to have a very different experience than, let's say, someone who grew up 10 years ago and transplanted to Chicago. If you're looking to like make a game based here. So there's conversations going on that the general public aren't privy to, because we've seen when we try to have the conversations about diversity online and the reactions, and it's always the knee-jerk keyboard warriors. And yes, I know I'm being dismissive, but I think after 4 years of harassment and, you know, being told to drop it and it's just a game, I can be a little salty about this topic.
Sure.
Yeah, you've earned the right, Tanya. You've definitely earned the right.
You know, the people that weren't going to buy the game anyway, that didn't care about there being a female character, that want to act like their franchise is ruined because, oh my god, Battlefield 5 is going to have a female character. Oh, well, it's not historically accurate. And I'm like, you've never picked up a history book, have you? So those are the things where there are people having the conversations and leading the charge, but because of the public response to some things, that they don't talk about the work they're doing. They're just very much behind the scenes, making things happen. And then we get announcements like Gears 5 is going to have a female protagonist because someone behind the scenes decided after 4 games they should do that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that was probably a fight in the studio, and I could be assuming, but when you've got a successful franchise with the same cast and suddenly you've got a female lead, I'm sure that there had to be some give and take.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just find it interesting because like I find it important, but I have never taken the stage on why this is important. And I don't think I should be the person that can talk about this. All I can do is support it, but I want to make sure that I support the right games, I support the right companies, the right people. So if there's people out there that do all this work, like, man, if I can amplify or whatever, just point me in the right direction. But it's hard to find because, like you said, it often happens behind either closed doors or in small networks. But I'm glad at least it's happening. So that's good to hear. And it kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about next. What is a good character? And I would like to hear from you both. Like, what is the one character that does it right? If there is like a perfect character or the closest to, I'll start with you, Tanya, or do you need a minute because you're thinking really hard? I think.
No, I'm not. I'm not thinking really hard. So for those listening at home and not watching this, I kind of made a face at the idea of a perfect character because there is no such
that's
thing.
true. Like, but who does it best? I guess.
That's hard because, you know, I'm gonna be that person where it's like I do love BioWare games.
Yeah.
However, their track record on queerness has been greatly improved, and you know the Weekses got consultants, so that the trans character Krem was much better done than in previous games. You know, Dorian's story is very touching and very moving, and written by a gay man, and yet there's some people still felt it was very stereotypical and not right. But they still have a way to go on race. Yeah. You know, I like Ubisoft, and I hated the first Watch Dogs. It was one of the worst games I played. I took it right back the next day. But then Watch Dogs 2 has a special place in my heart. So it's like people, I think, are learning from their mistakes. I can't give any one studio the kind of seal of approval. No. There are various games where it's like, this is an improvement, and I want them to keep improving. You know, like every iteration so far of Mass Effect has gotten better in terms of relationships, but not race. I would like David Cage to never make another game unless he can actually acknowledge the things that he's doing in the game and stop trying to hide behind there's no message here.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. It's a wish. Yeah. I mean, if I could get a dying wish. I would say for now, I'm going to give kind of BioWare and Ubisoft a soft pass on doing well sometimes, but that's about it.
Any character that stands out specifically to you?
Dorian from Inquisition, and one of the characters that Geralt meets in Witcher 3. And it's not the best representation, but the fact that it's in there to me was a step up for the Witcher franchise, even though there's no brown people.
Big sigh.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember his name. So you meet him early on. You have to find this hunter. For anyone who's not familiar with The Witcher, you have to find him, and he helps you track down some animals so you can kind of find out what's going on. And he keeps talking about how he's a freak.
Yeah.
And Geralt's like, well, I'm a freak too. I'm a mutant. He's like, not that kind of a freak. And even though I didn't like the initial meeting of the character, you realize it's because he's gay and got exiled, and the person he was in love with killed themselves after getting found out. And it was a tragic story, and they put it in there, but it wasn't played for laughs. You know, it wasn't the best representation, because yay, we get a queer dude, but he's exiled to the woods because the guy he was in love with killed himself rather than be out himself. But it's a step forward. So those are just characters, and Josephine Montilier and Zevran and Isabella as bi representation actually are good, because they're not jokes. Yeah. It's not like, oh, look at you sleep with that. Well, Isabella is like that a little bit, but there's a lot of individual characters from various games I could name. Marcus is a good character, and turned out one of my friends, Maurice Broadus, consulted on Watch Dogs 2. And, he's like half the people I grew up with. Where he's this dorky black kid that really likes technology, and he's a hacker. But people couldn't believe that, oh my god, there's a black kid who knows how to hack in San Francisco. And I'm like, have you been to San Francisco?
Fair enough. Actually, I have the two guys that probably wrote that quest in The Witcher 3. They're going to be on the show next week.
Oh, really?
That's amazing. That was a memorable quest for me as well. I thought it was a really big deal.
They're working on Assassin's Creed Odyssey right now, so we're going to be talking about that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'll bring it up. That it came up. I think they'll appreciate that. I'm not sure how much they had, how much they had to do with that specifically, but I know it's the quest designer that I'll have and one of the writers, because he had a quest once that also stood out for me personally, and I was like, I need to interview this guy. So he'll be on next week. Osama, do you have something like that, or do you have something that stands out a little bit more?
Absolutely. Actually, I do agree with Tanya that you can't just look at a company and say they're doing this right. I have not seen a big company. I've seen a few maybe small indie companies that are doing really, really great things for in that regard. But the one that comes closest for me is Blizzard with Overwatch, and I mean they did make mistakes. I mean, Lucio isn't perfect. He's not like what I would consider a good representation of a Brazilian person, and Farah was problematic at first, and the way they handled her Native American skins weren't great. But other than those two and maybe a few other small details, their cast is extremely diverse. I mean, it's about 50% women and 50% men. They have people who are from all different ethnicities. My favorite character there is Anna, because she's Egyptian. She has a voice actress who's from Egypt. She wears a veil, which is really awesome. She's older, which is so rare to have an older woman, and she's like, her voice actress is actually age appropriate, and she does all these things. Now, the problem with me saying Anna is great without mentioning the cast of Blizzard is because if you drag and dropped her into a game where every other character is just a white guy who's straight, then she becomes a stacked token, as I've mentioned before, where you're like, oh well, look, we did all our diversity, we just put it all on the same character, so thumbs up, we checked all the boxes, right? The reason Overwatch is good is because the diversity is spread out. So a lot of people will find representation in one or two. I say a lot of people because it's impossible to have a game that will represent everyone, and that's okay. That's never going to happen. I mean, you're going to have as many people as there are in the world in your game, as many characters as there are in the world to have everybody be represented. The intention is to try to spread it out and to put in effort. And Blizzard clearly, even though they fumbled a few times, that's fine. We don't want people to. We don't want to tell people, hey, you fumbled and focus on that because then people won't try. We want them to try, and if you fumble, it's okay. Fix your mistakes and keep going. And I see that in Blizzard, specifically for Overwatch.
That's right. I gotta go back to Tanya because I saw a tweet last week. I'm not sure. It probably wasn't you then. That is like, oh look, Blizzard put a hamster in the game before they put a black woman in the game. Was that you that tweeted that, or was it someone else?
It was someone else, but like I saw I almost said Hamtaro. Oh my god! The new hamster that's going to be in Overwatch. I saw it, and then someone else tweeted that. And in my Discord, we were chatting about it because I like Overwatch. I play it, but I'm not like a hardcore player. And I was just like, okay, get an animal before like a regular ass black chick, not someone who's a girl genius in a mech. Or Doomfist. I'm just like, we get an animal before a black chick, and it was just like, I should be surprised, but I'm not. And it'd be great if we could actually have black women in games as characters, and actually have black women writing them and voicing them, because that was my other gripe with Vivienne, that she's not voiced by a black woman. But it was just like, you already have Winston. Why do we need more animals? Why? I'm not surprised, and it's really sad.
Yeah. Well, have you seen any Dutch people in Blizzard? That's all I'm saying. No, it's bad. I do want to see if we can end on a hopeful note.
Oh, we're ending already?
No. But this is going to be like a 10-minute note at least. Because Osama, a part of your talk, and again, like, please go look it up because it's really good. Is because we were talking about Blizzard when you saw Iran in a video game for the first time. Iraq, sorry. Yeah. No can you touch on that? Like, well, not too briefly, but that was such a good part of your story. Like, when it does go well, like the impact of that.
Absolutely. Well, what happened? I am born in Iraq. I left when I was very young. I was a year and a half when I left. But still, like, I mean, a big part of my culture growing up is still Iraq. I'm second generation Canadian, right? So what? Apologies. I'm first generation Canadian. My kids are second generation. So what happened is, I've grown up with this image, a very specific image of Iraq, and I went back when I was 16, and it confirmed that image, and I went back when I was 30, and those were the only two times I saw my family as an adult or an adolescent. So what ended up happening with Overwatch is that they came up with a map called Oasis, and my friend Nicolas Barrière, who's a game designer who used to work with me, he tweeted, hey, check out these incredible images of Iraq in Overwatch, and it's like a beautiful, like, it's an oasis. It's called Oasis, but it's like a utopia almost. And they're advanced in science, and that's the Iraq from like before Saddam's reign. Iraq was like this cradle of civilization. It was where writing was thought to have been invented, et cetera, et cetera. It was not always the way it is now in the state that it is now. But when I saw those images, like, something came over me, and I started like crying at work because he showed them to me at work, and nobody else understood really why, and I had to sit them down and tell them, listen, when you see your own culture, your own people, your own country represented in this one specific way over and over and over, it actually has an effect on you, even when you start talking about it like, people, this is not how it is. It's almost as if you have two voices. One that believes the mistakes, that believes the bad that's being said, and one that's trying to convince yourself and others that that's not the case. So when someone else showed a future of Islam that projected something positive, I realized I never projected that for my own country of birth. It never dawned on me that there was a bright future, because my entire life, whenever I was able to, like, from the first time I was able to conceive a thought about my country until the present day, now that I'm almost 40 years old, I'm 39 years old, until today, I never thought that Iraq was going to break away from what it is now, which is a country that's been under embargoes and wars for my entire life. And for someone else to do that, it gave me hope. and never had hope before. Isn't that like that's incredible? It just overwhelmed me with emotion, and I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think about it, while I was on stage in front of hundreds of people at GDC and retelling the story, which I had retold many times before, the same emotions took over again, and I couldn't speak for a couple of minutes. And in retrospect, I guess that's a very good thing because it shows, that the emotions were real and raw, right? But at the time it was happening, it was like the worst thing that could happen to me. I think you can imagine. I was trying to speak and I couldn't find the words. It was incredible, but I'm happy it happened. I'm really happy that I was able to show those emotions because like nobody. It's hard to believe a person who says I cried, but when you see it, you can't deny it, right? And that's really what it was. It was that I had hope from a video game. So video games, there's no such thing as just a video game.
I just love that story. I love it so much, and especially when you get to see it. Again, go download the talk. Tanya, I hope that you have a story like that because that would be like amazing.
Nothing where I cried on GDC. But no, so well, mine is kind of so. And if I do start crying, I'm so sorry. But I recently joined this D&D show. And everyone involved is marginalized in some way in our cast. And as part of that, and part of Roll20, we did an interview with Anna Prosser, and of course, diversity and the lack of it in tabletop came up, and kind of what it felt like for us. Because a lot of times for me, I get people that are excited because they don't see people like them talking about issues. They can see people like them on panels. Because I don't make games. I don't have technical skill to make them. Writing's a different matter, but I'm not writing a game right now. So when we're talking about D&D and what it means for us and what it means to have this family, that it struck me that all these shows that are on Twitch, all these things that I've gone to are still mostly white dudes. The old bearded dudes that are older than D&D, even though I'm older than D&D by a few months. We don't get to see ourselves. We don't get to just go and have fun. We don't get to do anything. And shout out to Greg Tito and Wizards for not tokenizing us, not going, look at us, we're diverse. Look at us, we did good, and we got this diverse cast to play D&D. And I actually just started crying because I expected the absolute worst. I expected us to get harassed while we were doing the introductory stream in LA, during our regular shows, and just this outpouring of love that we've gotten for the show has been amazing. And like a video game hasn't given me that same depth of emotion, because a lot of times when I do get to see Black women in games, it's not the best experience. But one time at GamerX, and this is a good story. It was crying, but it was happy crying. I was on a panel. We were talking about, I remember what the panel topic was about. But we did kind of these intro moments. I talked about right before the panel some young ladies that come up to me, and they were young Black queer women, and they were just like, we always go to conventions, we always go to see other people talk, but we never see women like ourselves. We never see people like ourselves on these panels. And whether it's about diversity, whatever it is you're talking about, whenever you go to panels, and I'm sure you saw this at PAX West, and we see it at GDC, is that it's still majority white speakers on stage. And finally getting to see someone like them and not, not pigeonholed, not stuck in diversity, because I finally got to do panels about stuff other than diversity the last few years. That was just moving, and it's like, I'm not in this to get famous. I'm not in this for getting rich, because I'm not getting rich, trust me. But to have someone go, what you do is important because I finally get to see myself, that was the moment where it's like, this is why it matters. Yeah. Because I'm never going to get rich off this, and God knows I never want to be famous. Like, it freaks me out still when people recognize me. But that moment of having someone feel like they belong, that to me, that's way more important than anything else.
Yeah, that's just, I don't know, man. I have nothing to add to this. But I want to give Osama another chance to talk a lot, because when I said like we're closing off with this, he was like, "What?" So did you have anything else you want to get off your chest, Osama? Because like I got all the time in the world, man.
No, actually, I think like ending it with what Tanya just said is a beautiful way to end it. It's we do this because initially I did it for myself. I won't lie, because I wanted to see myself in games, etc. But increasingly, I'm getting older and I'm doing it for other people, and that's what's validating about it. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of emotional strain, and it's worth it whenever I hear someone say thank you, or thank you for being there, or thank you for being open, and that's what pushes me forward now, even if it wasn't what pushed me to do it initially. So I'm just repeating what Tanya said, but I think that's the best way to end this. If you don't agree with me, Tanya, I don't know, is this a good way to wrap it up?
No, that's a great way to wrap it up.
Oh, that is good. Like, all I would add is, like, if you're listening to this and you think this is good, like, be aware of what you can and shouldn't do. Like, if you have one more last tip for people like myself on how to be better and do better, like, I'll give you the floor. But otherwise, maybe they just need to listen instead of talk. So,
actually, I would say don't be afraid to ask people. Don't necessarily expect them or think that they have to answer you. But if you don't know about a topic, specifically in diversity, ask the people who are in the know and listen. Actually listen. Don't come up with counter arguments. People are afraid often to ask because they don't want to offend. But if you represent people in a bad way, that's a lot more offensive than asking a question. And generally, from my experience, you're not going to offend people with your questions anyway. But even if worst case scenario you do, you're only going to offend a person once by asking that question. You'll learn the answer and you won't do it again, and it's worthwhile.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm not going to try to throw more things at you because we already had a perfect closing of it and I had to just open my mouth again. But I do always close my show with a segment I call Podcast and Shill, where I give you the opportunity to promote yourself and your work and whatever you really want to promote. So, Tanya, where can we find you and what do you want to put out there?
You can find me everywhere online as Cypher of Tears, CYPHEROFTYR. And what can I talk about? So June 13th, I had an anthology come out that I edited called Game Devs and Others, Tales from the Margins. And that is the stories of people in the industry and adjacent to it on being marginalized and their experiences, both good and bad. My pinned tweet has information, or you can look it up under my name, Tanya DePass. And it is out. There's a hard copy, a Kindle, and a paperback every Sunday, 12 noon. Catch me on Rivals Waterdeep on twitch.tv/DND. And I talk a lot on the internet. If you follow me on Twitter, that's where you'll see me rambling about stuff often. And on Spawn on Me, Thursday nights at 7:30.
Yeah, that's great. And just for the record, you said you were going to sneak in Mass Effect and Dragon Age. It was 30 minutes on the nose when you mentioned Mass Effect and Dragon Age. So just wanted to put that out there. Osama,
nice.
Where can we find you?
I'm just going to point to my Twitter, so I'm at Osama Dorias on Twitter. I'm fairly active, not as active as Tanya. If you're going to follow one of us, follow Tanya. She's a lot more awesome. But otherwise, follow both of us. Why not?
You should. And we'll keep an eye out for that open world, super awesome game that takes place in the DC universe, apparently.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, and I am the Hashtagonist, and you already found me because you're listening to the show. But if you found me through another channel and you want to reach out and support what I do, you can find me at patreon.com/thehashtagonist or on Twitter as the Hashtagonist. Thank you so much for the show. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm glad I got to do it, and that I got to learn from you guys because there's so much expertise and knowledge there, and I was really happy for the show. It feels good, and I can't wait for other people to hear this as well. So again, thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time, and if you're still listening, I've already taken enough of your time, so hopefully you'll tune in next time. Have a good night.